Hello and welcome. Today's video is part 2 of my travel journal from when I spent 2 years living abroad in China and spent good hunks of those years traveling around Asia and elsewhere. I mentioned in the last video that this journal was a gift. It was from my cousin who gave me the sweetest going away party before I left. You can see it's really beaten up now. It used to, try not to lose my place. It used to close, and I'm hoping that one day I might learn how to fix it a little bit. And so, last video, I ended up here on this page with the picture of where I used to live in the winter. This was my room right here, and some bits about town. So, next was tomb sweeping holiday. This is not like a holiday in China. This is more of a thoughtful, somber holiday. So you don't say to people happy tomb sweeping holiday. And it's on the lunar calendar, so it's usually in April, but it changes. And this is one of the trips where I traveled alone. So I went to Nanjing in China. This was one of the weirder experiences I had. So these three places. Let's see, we've got the Shaolin Tomb of the Ming Dynasty, Lingu Temple. This one, so this is a different one. And then, okay, I don't see, and this is the city walls. I don't see. I actually really love this about these tickets, is that they were also postcards. I love postcards, as you might know from other videos, but of course I never sent these. I kept them for myself. This one's not a postcard. So this was a scenic area that had 3 or 4 attractions depending on how you counted it. So there was first this tomb, which I don't remember seeing the tomb. I feel like it was more a scenic area. And because it was spring, all of the plum blossoms were out, and it was really beautiful. And this area was really crowded, lots of people going for walks. But these 3 touristy areas were all next to each other. So next I went to this Lingu Temple area, and from my memory this area was mostly empty. I remember seeing a few other people walking around. I also want to say it was from here I found a museum that had to do with Sun Yat-sen and his political party, but it was a little quiet. And I can't overstate how China was crowded everywhere. I lived in this small town of 20,000 people, but there were always people everywhere. After 10 p.m., not so much, but it was just very crowded. I never walked down a street alone. And then this area was just quiet, which was nice. And of course Nanjing is a big city full of people, so it was very crowded there too. And then from this area I found another area that was empty of people, and I remember it was really beautiful. It was forested. There was a small museum, which again had to do with Sun Yat-sen's political party and the presidents that came after him. and there was a mausoleum for these like elected officials. Now, of course, what happened is Mao took over in the, I'm gonna get my Chinese history wrong. It was after World War II, so it was late 40s, I want to say, possibly early 50s. Okay, I just looked it up because that wasn't going to stand. And yeah, he came into office in 1943, so it was during World War II. And so what happened was this mausoleum that was being built was abandoned, and there was like part of an abandoned building and these other finished buildings that nobody cared about because they were for members of a political party that nobody really cares about anymore in China. And of course, Nanjing had a really bad time during World War II, so it was just this interesting place. It didn't feel real. I just remember walking around and feeling like I was in an alternate reality because it was quiet and serene, and for the first time in over a year in China, you know, I was alone, just alone in this forested area. So yeah, it was just a really bizarre experience, and after I walked through it all and saw the finished and unfinished buildings, you know, I ended up back in like central Nanjing, surrounded by people. And I think I immediately sprained my ankle. Not badly, but I was pretty grumpy about it. I'm looking, I remember I went to this temple too that was outside of this area and burned incense. And again, all the plum blossoms were out. It was really beautiful. And I was just having kind of a strange time. From Nanjing, I went to Shanghai and had a miserable time. I hated Shanghai. It was, there were a lot of reasons why I didn't like it. I've heard that the air quality in China has improved a lot since I left. I will say that 2 years in a country where the sun didn't shine really took its effect on me. Shanghai was very polluted. These images are all digitally altered. I don't know, you just heard my dog snoring. These images are all digitally altered to give blue skies, which made me cranky. You know, you get these tickets and they made a fake sky to pretend like it wasn't always gray and hazy and like this was clear, which it wasn't because there was a haze over everything. I stayed at this miserable, enormous hostel, you know, filled with foreigners and expats who I did not care for. You know, sometimes I met the most interesting people in hostels and had wonderful conversations. People from across the world, you know, who were in different places for all sorts of reasons. And sometimes it was just like people who went to a different country in order to drink as much alcohol as possible. And I had a really unpleasant experience in the hostel where I stayed. And the other thing about Shanghai was the tourist areas were very, very crowded, like wall-to-wall people. There's a saying in Chinese we used all the time, ren shan ren hai, which is like people mountain, people sea, because it's just everywhere is people. And they were also very fake. It was very clearly just like a completely rebuilt touristy historical area, but everything was rebuilt and looked very polished and new, and I just didn't like that. So that's me complaining about my experience in Shanghai, which I did not enjoy. From Shanghai, I went to Suzhou, which is known in China for being one of the most beautiful areas. And I had a better time in Suzhou. Sometimes there was that sort of like Disney World fakeness that got to me, but it was a really beautiful place, and the attractions there are like go to this historical mansion or go walk through these gardens. And of course it was spring, so it was a great time to be there. The other thing I really liked about Suzhou was at the time there were all these little cafes that sold postcards, which I already mentioned I love. And one of the things they would do there is people would write postcards to themselves and, write their address and stamp them, and then they had different slots for like how many years they should wait before they posted them. So you could choose like send this year, and then you could send a postcard to your future self, which I thought was really sweet. I didn't do it because this was, I didn't know where I'd be in a year at this point, so couldn't do that. But I thought it was very cute, and I just kind of liked the vibe of that. Yeah, so now we go to Indonesia. This trip was not during a holiday. I took a week off of school, of work for this. So my sister-in-law, who I've talked about before, is from Indonesia, and she was going there to visit her family and invited me to come with, which was awesome. And I've covered their faces. I feel weird about it, but I stayed with my sister-in-law, her daughter, my niece, her mother, and then her uncle, aunt, and their 3 daughters. And we were in Jakarta, and they were so nice, just the nicest people. Almost none of them spoke English. They all spoke, at least 3 languages, but it was just, they were so sweet, and they were so excited to have me in the family. And as far as in-laws go, I'm not actually part of their family, right? This is my brother's wife's uncle, so really we're not anything to each other, but it was wonderful. So we went to, this animal safari. They charge differently depending on if you're a local or a foreigner, and so they told me to hide my face. We were in a car, so you start the trip driving through and buying your tickets, and they said tuck your head down and hide. So I did, because they didn't want to pay extra for a foreigner, and they charged me as a child, which I think everyone was pretty happy about. So this also, so it had one of those live shows where the workers at the zoo do stunts and things, and this show they had, and I'll remind you, we were in Jakarta, Indonesia. The show that they did was cowboys and Indians. It was all in Bahasa Indonesian, which I don't speak, so I don't know what the plot was, Still very strange to see this depiction of American culture and, highly edited American culture. But the thing that I do remember was, instead of yee-haw, the cowboys said yahoo. So they would go yahoo. But this was great. It was great sort of being added to a new family. So in the summer of 2012, I guess this is the summer of 2012, I had been in China for 1 year now. I don't know why I was thinking 2012 was my last year. 2013 was my last year. So we had summer break between the spring and fall semesters, and I started it in Yunnan, which is southern China, and is gorgeous. I didn't have a great time in Kunming. I think I started the trip not feeling well. Like, I was sick when I arrived in Kunming. I think I wasn't eating, so like it wasn't great to begin with. But my favorite part was Lugu Lake, which was one of the most beautiful places I've ever been to in my life. It was a 10-hour bus ride, and we we end up in this small town. There wasn't a lot of tourism, in part because there wasn't that much to do. So I stayed in this hostel and rented bikes, and we biked around the lake, and that was kind of it. But it was one of the most beautiful places I've ever been. The local religion was a form of Buddhism that involved burning pine needles, so the whole place smelled incredible. Pine needles smell so good. So it smelled good, it looked good. The other thing at Lugu Lake, and this was interesting, so this is where the Mosuo people live, and so this is a Chinese minority that many people have heard of because they are matrilineal and matriarchal. And they have, I think they've been called like wandering marriages or maybe traveling marriages, where men live with their sisters and then they walk to their lover's house to go see them, and then like go back to their sisters who own all the property and things like that. And that's matriarchal. The women own everything and the men just kind of like travel to their lovers. Now, what I was told when I was there was that some of this is a lie. So it was interesting. China, they have this whole introduction to the Mosuo people now, and they sort of like it as a cultural artifact. Look at these people we have, they're so interesting. But back in the day, China tried to destroy this culture. They wanted them to assimilate the Chinese culture. And the other thing that I was told is that the Mosuo people aren't from Yunnan. They said originally they lived up north near Mongolia, and they were relocated to the south as part of this, attempt to destroy their culture. So it was kind of interesting to see how this has changed. But regardless, this was one of my favorite places that I went. And then I went to Italy. So from Yunnan I flew to Italy, which seems a bit weird, and this time I was living in Asia. And it was a bit weird. I had invited my family to come to Asia. I figured China might be hard for them. They don't speak the language, but there were areas that were more like tourist friendly, English speaking friendly. I thought maybe like Singapore. Anyway, I tried to get my family to come to Asia, and they decided to go to Italy. So I met them in Italy. So this is Rome, the Vatican, the Trevi Fountain, Colosseum. I went to the Colosseum. I don't think we started in Rome. I think we started in Tuscany, because I know we spent a few days out in Tuscany. I went to Rome, and then at one point my family left and I traveled alone. So this was the city of Lucca, and I actually had a really miserable time here. I got yelled at by an Italian lady. I still don't know why. I got lost. I got a lot of mosquito bites. The hostel I stayed at, everyone was super unfriendly. I don't know why, but I had a bad time in Lucca. And this is Florence, and Florence was fine, I think. Although the thing I remember, and this is an interesting cultural issue. At this point, I was an experienced backpacker. You know, I'd been around Asia. I traveled alone a lot. You know, I was alone in Laos and Vietnam and Cambodia and lots of places in China. The backpackers in Europe dressed a lot nicer than the backpackers in Asia. They looked a lot fancier. They didn't wear hiking boots everywhere. And I remember walking around Florence especially and really being judged for how I was dressed and how I looked. And it was interesting. It was kind of embarrassing. I mean, that was the thing too. In Asia, like, we were backpackers. I had a backpack that had my stuff in it. And the people staying in hostels with me in Italy had big suitcases. So I wasn't prepared culturally. Of course, I had like a nice dress and nice shoes for like occasions or when my parents were there, like going out to eat. I knew I'd have to look nicer for them, but I wasn't prepared for like the rest of it. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention, this is going to be Venice, is that everyone told me not to go to Venice, and Venice was my favorite part of the trip. So, if anyone tells you that Venice isn't worth it and that it smells bad, I disagree. It didn't smell bad when I was there, and it was summer, and I thought it was beautiful. It was sunny after like people being mean to me in Florence and Lucca. Venice was a breath of fresh air, and I really loved it. So the last place that I went on this summer break was Cambodia. And Cambodia was one of my favorite trips that I took. I'll admit I was pretty ignorant about the history of Cambodia. I decided I wanted to go because a friend of mine had gone and posted pictures online of these temples, and I was so intrigued by the carved stone faces. I'd never seen them before. And of course, the Angkor area and Angkor Wat are very famous, but I was very ignorant. I was also ignorant of the recent history, which is incredibly tragic in Cambodia. So I went to the Chung Ek, I'm sorry, I'm sure I didn't pronounce that right, genocidal center, and it was the best. I'm not sure if museum is the right word, but one of the best sort of museum experiences I've ever had, which is an odd way of saying it because of course it's about genocide. It was terribly sad, although now I think I'm confusing these places because I went to two. One was a museum that was inside of a school that had been turned into not a school, and one was the Killing Fields. And the Killing Fields, your entrance ticket came with an audio guide, which I'd never done before. I never spent the extra money at the museum for an audio guide. And it was incredible. It was so well done. They had voices of survivors. They had people doing readings of what happened. It was poignant and just an incredible experience, even though, again, terribly, terribly sad and tragic and horrific, but done in a way that I found very moving. And then, of course, you go to the Angkor area, and these different temples that the Angkor Wat is still out in the open, but many of the temples had been essentially swallowed by nature. Trees were sort of ripping them apart, and they were beautiful, and the nature was beautiful. And so it was all around just a really intense and gorgeous experience. It drove me to read more books about this part of the world that I realized I was very undereducated on, and I appreciate that. So Cambodia was a really meaningful trip for me, and the other thing was the food was really good. The first hostel I stayed at, and hostels don't often have like the best food, right? But there was some like beef dish with lime that was so good. So I don't know, I remember really, really liking the food in Cambodia, and I'm not sure I'd ever had Cambodian food before. I'm gonna end this video here, so we didn't get too far. We got from the winter of 2012 to the summer of 2012. But I guess I had a lot to say about that time in my life and all the places that I went. And I wish you a very good night. I would like to give a very, very special thank you to my patron, the Grouchow. You can support me on Patreon now too, and get a couple little behind the scenes videos and downloads of the audio files for my true crime series. Okay,